Hello and welcome. I'm joined this evening, I guess it's noontime around where he is. I'm joined by Southern Nordic. We spoke on a previous occasion, I think it was back in March, on his
Yes.
channel, and I'm delighted. I'm going to use one of his expressions. I'm tickled to death that he could turn up for this one. So you're very welcome, Southern Nordic. How are you?
Uh-oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I had my bad. I think there was an echo there. I apologize for that. I'm glad that you're tickled to death. I'm also tickled to death. Uh, Thank you for inviting me on here. I want to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is Appalachia and Appalachian wildlife. It's good to take, I appreciate you inviting me on to talk about this because I know on my Twitter account I put that I'm a naturalist among several other things, and that it's good to take a break from the usual politically charged or racially charged topics to talk about nature itself. So I want to thank you again for inviting me on here. I'm excited, ready to go.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you accepted the offer. So I'd start off just by asking you, you know, how did you get into, like, I know you're from a rural upbringing.
Yes.
Obviously you're going to come into contact with different animals growing up, but what are your earliest memories of being fascinated by wildlife?
Well, let's see. I have I had a very good childhood. Um, I had a sort of idyllic upbringing, you could say. Not in the sense that my family was wealthy by any means. We certainly weren't, but we did have a decent amount of land, and it started out basically with just pets and domestic wildlife. I mean, domesticated animals. I can remember my third birthday quite well. That's one of the earliest confirmed memories that I can remember having. But I had gotten as a gift from my mom two of these little zebra finches, two little birds. I remember the box that they came in from the pet shop. It was like a little cardboard box and it had like confetti on it and it had the little holes, so they could get oxygen and stuff. And it developed later. My great grandfather, he had a farm. He had chickens, cattle, a variety of things. And I think it was around the age of 4 years old. We went hiking. I've shown this place in some of my videos before. My great aunt still lives on the property, but they live down in a valley near the base of a place called Yellow Mountain, which is on the North Carolina Tennessee state line. And there's a large, massive ridge behind their house. And my great grandfather kept it cleared off because he would raise sheep and cattle up there. He'd also have some goats and donkeys. But I remember when I was 4, my great aunt, my mom, my dad, myself, and my grandfather, we all took a hike all the way up to the top of the ridge. It rises probably about, I don't know, maybe about 300 or 400 feet above the valley. And they have a pond at the base of that ridge. And my great grandfather kept trout in it. The water's really cool. It was a spring fed creek that ran into a pond. The springs, there's so many springs on my great grandfather's property. My great aunt at her house, she doesn't even have a well dug. She gets her water from a spring. They have a spring box and it's all set up. So her running water is supplied by a spring. But in this pond, I became fascinated with the peat frogs that I would hear in the evenings. I would see bullfrogs jumping around. And I remember on this particular hike, we walked all the way to the top of that ridge to where the woods began. The top of the ridge, there was forest at the top of it, but my grandfather kept practically all of it clear for grazing the livestock. But it was a summer day, and I remember as we were walking back down from the hike up the ridge, we were uh, we were probably about 60 or 70 feet above the pond, and outside of the pond, up on the grass, was a massive common snapping turtle. I mean, it was massive. It's, a common snapping turtle is not anywhere. It's not as big as the alligator snapping turtle that you find on further down in the deep south. But I remember we got up close to it, and my dad kept telling me, he's like, you better not, don't reach out and touch it. It'll bite you and it's going to hurt, and it ain't going to let go until it thunders. And I remember being amazed by this. But just standing a few feet away from that snapping turtle, its shell was probably about as long as this little table is that I'm speaking. So I'd say it was about 15, 16, 17 inches long, and it had its tail out. It looked like a dinosaur. So you can imagine a kid that likes wildlife, and that's when I started getting into dinosaurs and everything. Most young boys our age probably went through a dinosaur phase, I would imagine. And I'm like, wow, this thing looks like a dinosaur. And I was really impressed with it. And back home, at my house, my family's house, we lived just across the ridge on a different holler from where my great grandfather's farm was. And we had a massive stream that ran through our yard. So I started going out there. I started catching frogs. I'd catch crawdads or crawfish. It depends which region of the United States you're from. I would also start catching water snakes. Water snakes are a little aggressive. They're not poisonous, of course. My mother is absolutely terrified of snakes. She would be horrified when I brought a new snake up and stuck it. I started to gather little aquariums, just places where I could catch. I would catch my wildlife. I'd keep it in there for a couple of days, just observe it, and then let it go again. And this was a huge part of my childhood. When I got on up into elementary school, this was about the time that Steve Irwin got really popular. Do you remember Steve Irwin by chance? He had they called him the Crocodile Hunter. He had that show.
I do, yeah. I think he broke through late 90s, give or take.
Yeah, it was in the late 90s, I would imagine. Yeah. So I would have been about 10 or 11. But right before this, my dad had gotten me one of those Audubon Society field guides for reptiles and amphibians. And that is when I, at that age, I wanted to be a herpetologist when I grew up. Yeah, that's exactly right, Von Lisp. That's exactly right. I wish I would have probably been a lot happier if I'd have been a herpetologist. But the study of reptiles and amphibians, that was, oh man, And of course, as a kid, my father, he was into fly fishing as well. There's a lot of really good fly fishing areas in the northeast corner of Tennessee where I was raised. There is the South Holston River. It's actually a world famous trout water. They have a lot of brown trout, rainbow trout. There is the Watauga River. There is, and then there was the Doe River as well. So, and he would tie his own flies. And our stream that I just mentioned earlier in our front yard, it's big enough to where during the spring, trout would run up from the Doe River. They would run up our creeks up into our hollers, and they would do this to spawn. The trout would spawn in the spring, and there was a bridge that had a tile placed inside of it. It was probably about 10, 12 foot high. And there was a massive deep pool of water that formed where the water rushed out of the tile. It would get about 3-4 foot deep. It would fluctuate because, sediment would come down the creek if there was a big storm, but it always was about 3 or 4 foot deep. And I know at one time we had about 8 or 9 trout in this little pool, and this pool was just the size of this room that I'm in. It was deep, and I can remember me and my younger brother, we would get white bread, and we'd stand at the edge of the tile on the bridge, looking down into the pool, and we'd just throw bread off of it and watch the trout come up and eat it. We'd feed them corn, salmon eggs, all sorts of things. We had one trout in there one time that got up to about 18 inches long. Uh, we never did fish for them where they were on our own property, but you know, it was like from a young age, I was taught, you know, to admire and respect wildlife, you could say.
You mentioned amphibians.
Yes.
As far as I know, uh, Appalachia is famous for salamanders. Is that true?
Yes, yes, sir, it is. There are so many different species of salamander. That was another big thing I should have mentioned as well. We would catch salamanders out of the creek. And a lot of the types of salamanders I would catch were like, they're called dusky salamanders. There's also, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't recall the specific names, but there are some very beautiful salamanders. Some of them have yellow. There's marble salamanders, which are white and black. There are also, I forget, like I said, forgive me, I don't remember the names off the top of my head, but there's also a species that gets about 4 or 5 inches long, and it has a beautiful, like fiery orange body, and it has tiny little black specks on it. Um, Unfortunately, I don't recall offhand the names of these species, but it's very, there is a ton of amphibians in Appalachia. You see, Appalachia is a very unique area. It is a it's fascinating. My dad once told me that we have, in some ways, we have a climate that is similar to Southeast Asia, but we also have a climate that is similar to Northern Europe. So it's really, to give you a little background, the area that my property back home, the house that I was raised in, it sets at about 3,000 feet in elevation. So we do get quite a bit of snow up there in the winters. I remember we had the blizzard of 1993. I had just turned 6 years old. It was in March, and we got 30 inches of snow in our front yard. Where it was in March, it hung around for about a week, but you know, it warmed up and melted off. And there's a lot of amphibians there. If you go down off the mountain, that's where you start to find a lot more varieties of reptiles. I know up there in my home village, pretty much the only turtles that you would see are box turtles, which are they dwell on land. They're very beautiful, and common snapping turtles. If you go down off the mountain, you'll start to find a lot of your more aquatic turtles, such as like red ear sliders, painted turtles. Let's see. I don't believe we have We don't have diamondback terrapins in Appalachia, or at least my part of it. We never did. But we also have map turtles, yellow belly sliders. Such a variety. Let's see. As far as amphibians go, we have the southern leopard frog. We have tree frogs, bullfrogs, of course. I know one time I caught a bullfrog, and I mean, even right now that I'm grown, it would fit in both of my hands. It was massive. I actually caught him next to a cherry tree that we had a tire swing in next to the creek. I seen him, and I was like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna grab that real quick." And Mom was just like, "That thing's gonna piss on you and give you warts." And I'm like, "No, Mom, that's just nonsense. That's a myth. That's a myth right there." We also have toads. So yeah, as far as I mentioned a minute ago, that I was always fascinated with snakes. My mom is terrified of snakes. I would catch milk snakes, corn snakes, rat snakes, water snakes. A lot of people, there's this misconception, and I mean, I've even heard people say it in my hometown, "Oh, that's a water moccasin," which a water moccasin is another term for a cottonmouth, which a cottonmouth is a pit viper. It's one of the species of venomous snake in the southern United States. We don't have any cottonmouths in that part of Appalachia. We don't even have any down here in southeast Tennessee because they like the more coastal areas. They like swampy areas. But we do have two species of venomous snake in Appalachia. down here and up where I'm from in Northeast Tennessee. We have the timber rattlesnake, which its scientific or Latin name is Crotalus horridus. And we also have the copperhead. And I remember years ago, a buddy that I used to get into mischief with, this I think was back in 2015. We grew up together, but we had been out hunting ginseng, and on our way back, we come across a copperhead. It was about 1.5 feet long. And there happened to be a bucket nearby, so we snatched it up and we brought it home. We kept it in a cage for a couple of days in an aquarium. Finally, we let it go, but I was like, man, that was actually kind of stupid. We were out miles away from civilization. If we'd been bitten by that copperhead, there's a possibility one of us could have lost a limb, you could say. Timber rattlesnakes are very prevalent. In our part of Appalachia, my dad always told me that timber rattlesnakes and copperheads, they love to hang out, and this is where they hibernate for the winter, is up in the mountains on southern facing slopes. These southern facing slopes are warmer than northern facing slopes. I never did see a single venomous snake in all my years on our property, my great-grandfather's farm, because we lived on northern-facing slopes. It stayed cooler there, but those southern-facing slopes, snip snails and puppy dog's tails, that's what little boys are made of. Yeah, you got that right. You got that right. But where was I? Yeah, this is where they would hibernate in the winter in dens. They would congregate there. And usually around in July, when the weather got really, really warm, I know back home up there, we've had snow before in June. It's very rare. We've had it in May a few times. So it's just where the elevation is so high. I know it's in the south, what people view as the south, but the elevation is really high. But around July and August is when these venomous snakes will start to venture off of these southern-facing slopes down to the river because of, in case there's drought, they're closer to a source of water. Have you ever seen? I wish I could bring it up right now, but I've got a video of a timber rattlesnake that I had came across it was about a month ago when I was working. It was probably about 3.5, 4 foot long. Timber rattlesnakes, they can get up to about 6 foot long, 7 foot long. Oh man, that's a good question. I seen where Irish Fenian make Ireland grand again. Will the South ever rise again? I really don't know. That's a topic for a whole other video that I was going to make here soon. I am conflicted about the South, I guess you could say. While I admire the spirit of the Confederacy, I've done a lot of research lately, and a lot of the things I witnessed, I hate to say it, I think the South is going to end up looking like Brazil at the rate things are going. But anyways, I don't mean to get off on that tangent. Maybe it'll rise again. Maybe it won't. I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I think that's my bit about reptiles and amphibians. Like I said, I wanted to be a herpetologist at one time. Let's see. Do you have any questions? Anything right off you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I'll just ask you. Have you ever come across a black bear? I don't think you get grizzlies down where you are, do you?
No, sir. We don't have grizzlies here. We don't have grizzlies in eastern Appalachia. And yes, I have came across a black bear a couple of times in my life. I've seen the evidence of them much more often than I have actually seen one. There's numerous times I've been walking out in the woods, hiking on trails, and come across bear scat, maybe see a paw print. But I know there was one time, it was back in 2011. I had a couple of cousins over at my house, and we were just, we were cooking, we were just doing a little grilling just on my front porch. And all of a sudden we heard this crash. And my driveway just runs parallel to my house for about 30 yards or so to the road there. And all of a sudden, out of just down the driveway, right next to out my cars and one of my cousin's trucks, just running down the driveway at full speed was this black bear. And it probably weighed about, my cousin said he would imagine it weighed about 350 pounds. It was massive. And it was just running like hell. It ran across the road and it was like magic. Okay. Across the road, there's a little embankment that goes up about 3 or 4 feet, and there's this fence that goes across it. My neighbor across the road, when he was a much younger man, he'd kept, a couple of cattle there. And it's a barbed wire fence, and he's got quite a bit of wire on it. It's not just a barbed wire fence, that's got like 3 or 4. There's probably like 10. The space between the barbed wire is only about 8, 9, 10 inches. And it's on a post that is about, 4 or 5 foot high. It was like magic in a way. That bear, after it had barreled across the road, climbed up that embankment, and it's like it went through the fence. I don't know. I don't imagine it jumping the fence. I don't know how it got through the fence, but it didn't tear up the fence. I don't know. I will say this, black bear are extremely agile. Bear hunting is a very popular thing here in Southern Appalachia. We have black bear. As far as other large mammals go, we do have mountain lions, or we call them panthers, cougars. I think that's what's on the thumbnail of this video. We do have those. Myself, I have never seen one, but I have heard them. I've heard them scream at night, and it's a scream that will raise the hair on the back of your neck. It's a very haunting noise. It's a frightening noise. And I got a little story I'll tell you right quick. It was back in 2017. Early one morning, it was actually about 5 in the morning, I had decided I was going to go ginseng hunting that day. And we'll talk about ginseng here in a bit. But at that time, I had a dog. I called her June Carter. I have this sort of weird affinity where I name my dogs after country music singers. But June, she was a black lab and a pit bull mix. And I promise, she is one of the most intelligent dogs that I've ever had. But I took her with me. So we left our house at about 5 in the morning. It was still dark out. Sun was just barely coming up. This would have been in like early September. And I've got a neighbor back home that lives about 200 or 300 yards up the holler from me. He's got a field that looks down upon my house and our property. That particular morning, he's got a barn that's just maybe 50 yards from our house across the fence. He had pulled down there to cut some wood. And as he pulled down there in his truck, he seen a mountain lion, a panther. He said it was about the size of June, my dog. Well, I had head up into the woods, and from where he was sitting, you could see, he said he could hear me and June walking up through the woods, up the trail behind our house. I was going to go up on the ridge, walk the ridge for a mile or two, and go hunt some ginseng on I know it's illegal, but back then I always liked hunting ginseng on government property because at least then I knew I wasn't stealing out of anybody's patch. But I would never recommend that. Don't do that. If you hunt for ginseng on government land and you get caught, they'll crucify you basically. But he said that he caught that panther in his headlights and it looked at him for just a moment. He said he was about 100 foot away from it. And he said it just turned around casually, got up and started walking up the hill, and it crossed the fence. It was stalking us. And I didn't find this out until later that evening. And I came back, I'd found some ginseng, but I noticed that on my way up to that ridge, June, she would not leave my side, and I could tell she was acting nervous. And when I came back that evening, I ran into my neighbor. He was out there working on a fence, and he's like, "Do you know you about got killed this morning?" And I was just like, "No, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "I kid you not, there was a panther that took off up in the woods after you and your dog left at about 5 this morning." And I was like, "Whoa, well that explains why my dog was acting so strange." She was extremely nervous. Normally, if when June was with me, she would just, she'd stay around me, she'd follow me. But yeah, that was kind of a frightening experience. I didn't have a gun on me right then either, so I would have probably been screwed if that panther decided to have attacked.
I was going to ask you actually. I think you mentioned it in one of your videos a while back, and there's a film called Cocaine Bear.
Oh
This,
yeah,
yeah, this is a black bear as far as I know, because
yes,
I didn't watch the full movie. I think I watched the first 10 minutes. Like the beginning of the movie is just incredible, and I was pulled in straight away. But then after that, I just got bored and I didn't watch anymore. But it turns
How
out that
does how does
yeah,
that
go ahead.
movie start? I was just going to ask you. I've not seen the movie, but I've read the book that talks about this. How did that movie start? Did it start with a plane crash and people throwing drugs out of an airplane?
No, as far as I remember, it's a couple. They're out hiking or
Okay.
whatever, and they're on some ledge taking
Yeah.
photos, and suddenly they look behind them and there's this black bear. And I think the wife is like, honey, there's a bear over there, and he's like, oh, relax, it's just a black bear. They're generally very wary of humans.
Yeah.
Don't worry. And he decides to take a photo, and whatever, when his phone clicks, and it takes the photo, the bear notices them, and like the bear is completely coked out of its head. Um, Seemingly based on a true story. As you know, a plane crashed. It was carrying a load of coke,
Yeah.
and
I've
this
got the
bear
book right
rummaged.
here.
Yeah,
I've
oh,
got
you've
the
got
book
it
right.
right, right.
Yes. This book right here. It's called The Bluegrass Conspiracy. And it's about the state of Kentucky. And there's a lot of shady dealings that has happened in the state of Kentucky over time. There's a lot of spook sort of intelligence activity that goes on up there. But what it is, it's basically the story of a Kentucky guy. His name was Andrew Carter Thornton III. At one time, he was a lawyer. He worked for the Lexington Police Department as a narcotics detective. He was in the military. This guy had some uh, very crazy connections. But this book, it goes into detail showing how government helps with a lot of things such as drug trafficking. But to consolidate this little introduction to this book, basically what happens back in, I think it was 1985, on September the 11th, 1985, uh, Andrew Carter Thornton III had flown, I believe it was a single engine Cessna aircraft, down to Florida. He picked up 200 or 300 pounds of cocaine, and it's a conspiracy itself about why he ended up crashing the plane. Some people say that he was being followed by, I think, air customs. Some have claimed that that was a conspiracy. But anyway, what happened was on the morning of September the 11th, 1985, there was this old man, I forget his name. He lived up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he woke up that morning, drunk his coffee, and walked out to get the paper off his porch, and he sees a dead body and a failed parachute in his driveway. Calls the cops, and Andrew Carter Thornton III had like 75 pounds of cocaine strapped to him. He had a couple of guns on him. He was in military fatigues. His parachute had failed, and he had set the plane on autopilot, and it crashed down near the Chattahoochee National Forest, which is in northeastern and I think north central Georgia. And there was untelling how many pounds of cocaine was on this aircraft, and allegedly, and what I mean, it's no, this is a true story. There was a black bear that got into that cocaine. It probably only, and they say it probably only lived for about maybe 4 or 5 minutes after it got in and consumed this massive amount of cocaine. But for about 4 or 5 minutes, I would say that was maybe the most terrifying beast on the planet. They actually have a museum. I think it's up in Lexington, and they found the body of this bear. No, I don't think it was too far from the aircraft's crash site, but they actually found it and they stuffed it. They got a taxidermy to stuff this bear, and it is on a display, I think, at a museum up in Lexington, Kentucky. It's somewhere in Kentucky, but I think it's Lexington. Don't hold me to that though. So yeah, that's that's interesting. Interesting little side story.
Yeah, it would be the polar opposite of Gentle Ben from the old TV show. So yeah, there's a question here, Sono, from
Charlie Shoestring. I know Charlie. Yeah, what do you think about the reintroduction of red wolves? Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about coyotes first. That was something I wanted to touch upon. Appalachia at one time, I'll answer your question in just a couple of minutes, Charlie. But at one time, Appalachia, back when the settlers came here, we had gray wolves, red wolves. We also had elk. Elk is another thing that has been introduced successfully into the Smoky Mountain Park, National Park. And they're on over in North Carolina. I've actually seen elk before over near Bryson City, North Carolina. I took a trip there last fall with one of my good friends, and we came across an elk herd. But when the settlers arrived, they hunted the elk to extinction, and they got rid of all the gray wolves and red wolves. Well, in the 20th century, around the 1940s and 50s, the coyotes started making their way into the South and on up here into Appalachia. Coyotes are extremely prevalent. They're a nuisance. I mean, I drive a truck for a living, and you wouldn't believe how many roadkill that at one time was a coyote that I drive past and see. I know they're a nuisance. I mean, coyotes, they prey upon your chickens, your livestock. The eastern variety of coyote is much larger than the western, but they're still, they're not as big as a red wolf, of course. I remember one time several years ago, I was visiting my dad one night. We were just sitting there talking, and all of a sudden, it was about midnight. Around midnight, we heard this awful cackling and laughter and howling. And I got a flashlight and I walked out on my dad's back porch and I shined it up the hill into the field past our gardens. And it was just like dozens of just yellow eyes start looking down at me, the light reflecting off of them. It was quite a sight, you could say. But we do have a lot of coyotes. Coyotes are pretty smart animals. But I found out a few years ago that they had reintroduced red wolves into parts of western North Carolina. I think it's interesting, that they are reintroducing some of this wildlife. I think I first learned about this maybe in 2018 or 2019. Charlie, this is a question for you. Have you heard anything are they taking hold of parts of western North Carolina, or are they pretty much just static, just getting by? That's something I would like to look into myself. But yes, I have heard about the reintroduction of these red wolves into western North Carolina. To give some of the listeners a little bit of context, I believe the red wolf is it's larger than an eastern coyote, but they're not as large as a gray wolf, of course. Gray wolf is the largest species of wolf, I believe, in North America.
They reintroduced the gray wolf to Yellowstone a few years back, and they're thriving now. Well, a few decades back, shall I say? They're thriving now. They're doing very well.
Yeah. And it seems like the elk population now we only have one species of deer here in Appalachia, and that is the white-tailed deer. I know if you go on over like into the Rocky Mountains, you have your mule deer, you have your black-tailed deer, but you also have white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer is the only species of deer that we have. Deer hunting is immensely popular here in Appalachia. It's like bear hunting. Let's see. Do you have any other questions about some of these large mammals? We also, of course, have a lot of smaller mammals. We have skunks and, we have beavers. We actually have a decent beaver population. They'll dam up their little streams and turn it into a lake, turn it into a small pond. We have a lot of otters. Oh, go ahead.
I'm guessing you have raccoons, a lot of raccoons.
Oh, yes, we do. We have raccoons. We call them trash pandas. That's what we call them.
Right. Are they a bit of a plague?
I think they're hilarious. I think they're cute, but they'll get into your trash and tear everything up if they feel so inclined, you could say. We also have groundhogs, which is just a type of rodent that burrows that gets to be about the size of a raccoon. I have known of people that had found a raccoon kitten. I guess you call them a kitten. I'm not sure what the proper term for a raccoon's young is. But I know of a couple of people that had raised a female raccoon from its infancy, basically, from when it was very young. You can actually raise a raccoon if it's a female. If it's a male, you have no chance in hell. If you were out somewhere and you find like a little litter of raccoons, if you want to bring them home, you can raise the females and they can become a decent little pet. But a male, once that male reaches sexual maturity, it will tear your house apart. It will tear everything up. So yeah, we have raccoons here.
I'm very glad you've disclosed that information, because I know someone who lives in Washington State who loves raccoons and would like to raise a raccoon, and that's vital information.
Yes, you gotta get them when they're young, when they're very young, and it's got to be a female. You can raise a male raccoon when it's young, but you need to get rid of it before it reaches sexual maturity, because once it reaches sexual maturity, there's nothing you can do with it. It will be like having a Tasmanian devil running around your house. I knew of someone that tried to raise a male raccoon, and they said it was the worst thing he ever tried to do. Basically, he had to let it go because, once they reach. But the females, on the other hand, if they grow up around you, you can relatively domesticate them. They actually make a decent and interesting pet, you could say.
What about opossums?
Oh, yes, sir. We have possums. Oh, we here in Appalachia, we drop the O off of it and just call them possums.
Right. I looked that up before we came live. I was like, because I always confuse them. The opossum is supposedly North and South America, and the possum is, I think, Australasia.
Interesting. I got a question for you. Do y'all have raccoons in Europe as well?
No, not that I know of.
Really? Okay.
I think there's an animal called a raccoon dog, but it's a completely different species.
I wasn't sure if y'all had them over in Europe or not. I wasn't sure about that. That question came into my mind a year or two ago, and I just never had gotten an answer for it myself.
Yeah, the animals we have that are similar, they generally tend to be a bit smaller. For example, we have brown bears in Europe.
Yeah,
I think
are they the size of like a black bear?
I think they're more or less, yeah. They're not the size of a grizzly, that's for sure. So, okay, what's this? There's another one about wolves here. Sono,
yeah,
have a look.
Yeah, that's my good friend there. The unplanned modern migration of wolves, coyotes, and hybrids around the U.S. due to suburbanization is pretty interesting. Yes, that's something interesting about these coyotes. I currently live in a neighborhood down here in southeast Tennessee, but there's many nights that I hear coyotes that break out laughing and howling that are probably just a half a mile away. These coyotes, what they like to do is they want to live on the periphery of civilization, because living around humans has a lot of benefits. They can get into trash, they can get livestock, easy prey. Yeah, paddle of the accents. That's a good
Yeah,
one.
you're getting two very different accents here. Very different.
Yep.
I was going to say to you, about coyotes. I saw it was a clip on YouTube a few years back, and I think it was a guy. I think he had a rifle, and he was with his dog, and he was just kind of lying on his belly with the rifle,
Yeah.
and he was killing coyotes. Like it was a really massive
Yes.
flat plain. But the way the coyotes operate, it's so sneaky, and I think wolves are very
Yes.
similar because I've read a few Jack London books, whatever, and
Yeah.
wolves, what wolves will do with a dog is they will pretend to be afraid of the dog, so that the dog will chase them, and the dog
Yep.
thinks it's chasing just one wolf or maybe two wolves, and as you know, when the dog is about a mile out, half a mile out, suddenly it's destroyed by about 7 or 8 wolves. It's just completely
Yep.
ripped apart, and you could see the coyotes. They were trying to do this to your man's dog. They were trying to entice the dog out further and further and further, and of course he was just taking them out with the rifle. But
Yeah.
um, very very clever. Like I guess it's their instinct.
Yes, it is. I know at one time they were offering a bounty here in parts of East Tennessee. This was several years back, but they were offering bounties for coyote pelts um, because there is a overpopulation problem. Like I said, man, the coyote has been immensely successful at adapting to these different environments. I actually read an article last week that was said that the coyote is about to enter. It's currently about to enter South America. Like they have spread. Like it's the last century. I think coyotes originated probably over in California, out in the West. But it seemed like in the 1940s and 50s, that's when they started to expand their range and their territory. And like the eastern variety, I don't know if they're scientifically classified as a sort of separate entity from these western coyotes, but I've heard many people say that the coyotes here in the eastern United States get much larger than the ones in the west. And they have traveled down through Mexico, through Central America, and they are about to enter Colombia and other parts of South America. So they've been extremely successful. Um, for anybody that's got the idea that they may want to kill some coyotes, I have a recommendation as the rifle to use. Get yourself a 22 250. A 22 250 is what is probably one of the best coyote guns out there. It's got such range, it's also got such a high muzzle velocity. Uh, it's a good weapon to use to get rid of some coyotes, you could say.
All right. So I guess if anyone has a question for Southern Nordic, we go for about 15 more minutes. So get your questions in. I'll just ask you, Sona, what do you feed? Because you told me that you have a pet python
Yeah,
and a lizard.
I have a ball python and a leopard gecko. And the ball python will eat mice. My wife hates the ball python. I might actually sell it here soon. I've got a guy I'm talking to at work that he's looking to get a snake for himself, so I may end up selling it to him. Plus, where we've got a daughter on the way, I don't want some unfortunate events to happen. I've heard stories of people that's had boa constrictors before, and them almost killing their child. So I'm probably going to get rid of it. I've got a leopard gecko, which leopard geckos are native to Iran and Afghanistan, those parts of the Middle East. I would show you to her, right? I would show you my pets, but my ball python had just eaten, and it can be vicious sometimes. And my leopard gecko, I would show you because it's really docile, easy to handle, but he is currently shedding right now. He's got his skin about halfway off of him. If I didn't have a child on the way, I would like to get maybe a few turtles, things of that nature. Like I said, I wanted to be a herpetologist as a kid. I love reptiles and amphibians. I also love fish, aquariums. Me and my wife years ago, we used to have a massive. We had a 75-gallon cichlid tank. Cichlids are probably the most colorful freshwater fish that people keep. We had 2 tiger Oscars. These tiger Oscars were massive. They got to be like about this big, probably about 10, 11 inches long. And we would watch them sometimes. And mind you, we had other fish in this tank as well, but they were the 2 dominant ones. They would lock up with each other by the lips, and they would push each other back and forth in the tank. They'd splash water out. We eventually had to sell them to a pet shop because they were just getting too big, you know. But yeah.
I was going to say that, you know, you're on about you might get rid of your snake. Well, I was going to say, if you're in need of a new pair of leather boots and you need to get rid of a snake, you know,
I could make me a headband for my black hat that I wear.
There you go. There you go. Waste not, want not. Waste not, want not. So, I was going to say, would you ever be interested in, because it's one of my dreams is to go to Komodo Island and see the Komodo dragon. Have you ever considered going there? Like the biggest lizard in the world.
Well, I've not considered it. I don't foresee myself ever traveling abroad. I mean, maybe, but Komodo dragon, that's a fascinating reptile, the largest lizard in the world. And their bite, say if you get close enough to one and they bite you, their bite can be deadly. It's not because I don't think they have a venom or anything. The only 2 venomous lizards in the world are the Gila monster, which is in like Arizona, the southwestern U.S. and Mexico, and then the Mexican beaded lizard. Those are the only 2 that have like a venom that could kill you. But the Komodo dragon, the reason their bite can be so dangerous is because, look, have you ever seen them on those nature videos? They have that drool running out of their mouth. They eat dead stuff all the time. If you get bit by one of those, you are going to form an infection, a very disease-ridden infection, and it could kill you if you don't receive treatment very soon.
Yeah, and it's a tropical place as well, so
yes,
the infection is going to spread very quickly.
Yeah, it would just fester.
Yeah. You see them like they bite a wild pig or something, and then they just follow the pig for like a few days.
Then the pig is riddled with infection and just collapses.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting.
You're going to. We should mention before we finish. You wanted to talk, Sono, about ginseng.
Yes.
What is it good for? Like, what qualities does it have?
Ginseng. I got some pictures here for you. Ginseng is a sort of Appalachian tradition. It grows especially well here in southern Appalachia, on up into southwest Virginia, eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, up in central Appalachia. It grows all through Appalachia. It also grows in the Ozark Mountains, which is a small mountain range that runs up through Arkansas and Missouri. Wild-grown ginseng, North America. There's different varieties of ginseng. I've heard it's an aphrodisiac. Yes. Yeah, the Chinese is who loves it. And the ginseng, you can make a lot of money, supplemental income, by digging ginseng root. The roots can get massive. Ginseng, I believe, is the slowest growing plant on earth. I got some pictures here. These pictures were taken about 20 years ago. This is a ginseng patch behind my house back home. Let me see if I can show you there. Look at that. That's just a holler full of ginseng, basically. That's one picture. They form these red berries in September. Here's another picture. This is what they call a 4-prong ginseng plant. It has one stem, and there's 4 prongs that has the leaves that arises from it. There's 2 prongs, 3 prongs, 4 prongs, and one time my dad told me he found a 5-prong. Here's another picture. Another picture there. It's got the red berries. You can eat the berries. I wish I had it right now. I've actually got this drink called Dr. Enough. It's a type of soda that is bottled. It's kind of like 7 Up, but a lot better than like 7 Up or Sprite or anything. But there's a variety they make called ginseng, and it's red colored. I wish I had that bottle. I don't have it right now. I don't want to leave. And this is just a picture of the ginseng early in the summer before the berries have formed. You can see there's numerous plants all around this log here. It's kind of hard to do this. Let's see, that one right there that I'm pointing at, that's a 3-prong. This big one is the 4-prong. The ginseng root is used, like I said, the Chinese view, there's a sort of mysticism around ginseng regarding the Chinese people. Ginseng grows. There's a variety that grows in China, Korea, I believe in certain forested parts of perhaps Mongolia, and it also grows over into Siberia as well. But the Asians, the Chinese and the Koreans, they view the North American subspecies of ginseng as it is superior. It's superior to their Asian ginseng, and they will pay immense amounts of money for a pound. Just to give you an example, when I go out ginseng hunting, you want to sell it by the pound. You dig the root, and the roots can be massive sometimes. And there's also grow rings that form where the root attaches to the stem, and that way you can kind of gauge how old the ginseng plant is. I have dug some ginseng plants before that were probably 40, maybe 50 years old, and there's older ones out there. This ginseng patch behind my house, it's still there. My grandfather started this probably back in I think he started planting some of it back in like the 1950s. And my dad, he has expanded it. You see, they want you to hunt ginseng. You're only technically legally allowed to hunt it from September the 1st till the end of the year. They want you to wait because September, late August is when the berries form, and you want to collect those berries. If you find a plant and you find some berries, collect them. This is how ginseng, spreads from area to area. Deer love to eat ginseng, and the natural digestive process. The deer takes them a dump elsewhere in a different holler. Boom, you may have ginseng in a year or two. It's a rare plant. Kind of rare. You can, if you know where to look for, you can find it. Let's see. Someone asked a minute ago, I think, how much is ginseng? Yeah. Hey, what's up, Tricky Woo? Ginseng will sell from anywhere. I've seen it lately as low as $600 a pound for the root. And depending on demand, I've seen it go as high as $1,200, close to $1,300 a pound. It's a good way. If you find a few pounds of ginseng, I mean, that's enough to buy, that could be enough to buy yourself a cheap, older used vehicle, It's kind of a tradition here in Appalachia, hunting ginseng. I know whenever we would hunt it, we would get a pound or two. We would sell it to these Filipinos that lived over in the a town called Marion, North Carolina, which is basically in the foothills of Appalachia. It's where the Piedmont region of North Carolina starts to get into Appalachia proper, you could say. These Filipinos would buy it. Let's see. In a Father's Day surprise gone awry. It's surprising he only lost a toe. He could have lost a whole leg. But there's certain markers that you can look for that will help you to find ginseng. Ginseng, I've always had luck finding it growing around poplar trees. And there's also various little types of herbs and plants that grow in the undergrowth as well. If you know what Indian turnip looks like, if there's Indian turnip in an area, there's a good chance that there's a ginseng plant somewhere nearby. There's also several others I could go through the list on, but I know we're running out of time. So yeah, that's about ginseng.
What
It's
about truffles? Do you get truffles in Appalachia?
I don't think we have truffles. Don't you use a type of pig that has been trained to sniff out the truffles? Is that
Yeah,
how
a
they
pig
hunt
or a
for
dog.
them?
A pig or a dog.
Yeah,
I saw them in Italy. I was in northern Italy, and it was one morning. It was in Milan, and there was a
yeah,
man, and he looked like he was from the countryside. He was dressed like a fellow from the countryside, and he had a dog with him, and he had a sign, and it said something like, I asked my friend to translate it. It said, while you were all sleeping, my dog found this truffle, and it was tiny. Like it was like the size of a small chicken nugget or whatever.
yeah,
And he was selling it for like 40, 50 euros. So, which would be equivalent in dollars, more or less. So you can find, it's the white truffle in Italy. And if you find a big one, that could be 40,000 euros.
yes. Truffles are. Oh man, it's crazy what they. The ginseng root is sort of similar to this. If you find a massive root, they call it a mandrake root. If you find a massive ginseng root that looks like it has a torso, two arms, a leg, and two legs, you can sell that for thousands of dollars because the Chinese, they value it. Like I've seen pictures of ginseng roots. There used to be this show on the History Channel. I think it was called Appalachian Outlaws. It came on back in I believe 2013 through 2015. And what it did, it was just basically kind of like a reality show that followed like 4 or 5 different sets of ginseng hunters. And there was a guy that found a root. No, what? Let me back up. They also show the guy that was the dealer that all these hunters would bring their ginseng into. He was an American though. He was a white guy, but he was presented from this Chinese guy this ginseng root. The root was probably about this big, and it was the shape of a man. And they actually had it framed on top of the root was like like laying on velvet. They didn't use the root, but they admired it so much that they wanted to preserve it, and they presented that root to him. It was the Chinese and the Koreans. They view ginseng, like I said, there's a sort of mysticism around it. But we don't have truffles here in Appalachia, as far as I know. We do have morel mushrooms. Morels are very tasty. There's also a lot of, I have to admit, my knowledge of fungi and hunting for mushrooms is not all that great, but I do know what morels look like. And you can sell a pound of morels for quite a bit of money. Not as much as ginseng, but if you can find some of these higher end restaurants, they will gladly buy morel mushrooms from you. I've had them fried before. You just basically stick them in some batter, and you just fry them up in a skillet. And I know some people call them what is it they call it? Dry land fish is what they call it, because if you fry them up like that, they say it reminds them of the taste of catfish, which I can kind of see that myself, but they're really good. You can usually find, I've always had a lot of luck finding morel mushrooms under apple trees, crab apple trees. They usually pop up in the middle or late April. So it's something, it's pretty cool. But
You
yeah,
mentioned you mentioned the mountain lion there, the cougar. Have you ever seen a bobcat?
I have seen a bobcat once. It was back in probably 2010. I was out. I was actually on my way to work. Let's see. It was late. It was either late 2010 or early 2011. I was on my way to work, and it had killed something and was carrying it across the road. It was a little 2-lane country road, and it seen me, stopped and looked at me. I think it had a rabbit carcass in its mouth, and it looked at me for a second, and then it just took off running. That's the only time I've actually seen a bobcat with my own 2 eyes. My aunt's husband, he had killed a couple of bobcats. He's got one of them mounted in his living room back home. He took it to a taxidermist.
All right. So I think, Sono, we're towards the end now, and I've really enjoyed this chat. I was
Yeah,
looking
I've
forward
enjoyed
to
it
it.
too.
I was
I've
looking
really
forward to it
enjoyed
all
it.
weekend, and it hasn't disappointed. And I
Um,
recommend people go and check out Southern Nordic's channel. I'm actually quite a fan of his work. I
well,
think
thank
he's
you.
a fine storyteller and a poet. I'm going to throw loads of compliments your way now. He's a poet. He's a poet and a philosopher. And
My face is turning red now.
but yeah, do check out his channel. I can't really put links into YouTube at the moment. I think I can put a YouTube link in for his channel. If you're watching this on Odyssey or BitChute, all his channels will be in the description. So Southern Nordic, I'll leave you with the final word.
Yeah, I just wanted to give y'all a book recommendation really quick. I've not read it entirely yet, but my great aunt that I was talking about earlier back home, she gave this book to me probably about a year ago. I've read about a quarter of it so far. I've actually got the page marked. It's called A Thousand Mile Walk to the Gulf, and it's by a guy who some of you might be familiar with. His name is John Muir. John Muir was a Scottish naturalist. He came here to the United States and he's written several books. He is a very interesting, he's an interesting figure that I think more of our guys should learn about. He was a Scottish naturalist. He traveled all across North America, cataloging plant and animal life. A Thousand Mile Walk to the Gulf is his story of traveling from up in eastern Kentucky. He started out in eastern Kentucky. He traveled all down Appalachia. He actually walked, he went through the Cumberland Gap, I think. Don't hold me to that. It's been a little, I need to finish reading this book. But he traveled down through Tennessee, where I go fishing so often, and where a lot of my videos where I film them is up on the Hiwassee River. And it's near the southeast corner of Tennessee, and there is actually the hiking trail is called the John Muir Hiking Trail. It's beautiful there. That is part of the trail that he walked on foot. He walked 1,000 miles altogether down to the Gulf of Mexico. He's a very interesting figure, John Muir. So if anybody ever comes across this book, I'm only about a quarter of the way through it, but he's a name that I see that pops up sometimes in our circles. Someone worth checking out.
I read about him earlier this year, Sono. It was a book about
Did you?
Yosemite.
Yeah, he
And I
wrote a
think he
book
spent
about
a lot of
Yosemite.
time. Yeah, he
Yes.
spent most of his time in Yosemite.
Yes.
And he was an intellectual, and he was very interested in geography, and he was always writing articles about flowers and plants, and
Yes.
he was drawing maps. He was very interested in the glaciers of Yosemite. And I think a lot of the kind of the WASP elite, they used to go down to Yosemite for retreats, and he was a guide for them. And on one occasion, they wanted him to bring them somewhere to see certain flowers, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I've got to do a shift at the mill." They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that this intellectual was working at the mill, and they said that in around Yosemite back then, there wasn't really, you didn't have different classes. Everyone kind of put their shoulder to the wheel.
Yeah.
Even the doctor, whatever. So
interesting. Yeah, I would like to learn. I knew he had written a book about the Yosemite. He's an interesting guy. He was really Christian. He was Presbyterian, as a lot of Scotsmen are. But I think, even though I have more of a pagan worldview, even though he was such a Christian, such a devout Presbyterian, there was still that European biospirit inside of him that wanted to explore these things. It's just something interesting. Let's see. I did see a comment. Tricky. Hey, how you doing, Sonia Willard? It's good to see you. Tricky Woo said a ginseng root sold for $250,000 at an auction in 2005. I would believe that, because it's magnificent what these roots can grow into and look like. But yeah, I think that's about all I got for now.
All right. Well, I was going to say the next time we see you, you'll have a gold crown on your head and gold rings on your finger, and everyone will be saying he found the mother lode in the ginseng world.
Oh, I wish. I wish. I
All right.
wish. Maybe so. I know in September I'm going to take a trip. See, I live about 3.5 hours southeast of where I was, southwest, I should say, of where I was raised. I live near the southeast corner of Tennessee. But here in September, I'm going to take about 2 weeks off of work, and we're going to go up there and see the family. So I've had a lot more luck finding ginseng up there. I've only found a little bit down here, and it's up there near the Hiwassee River. I've only found just a little bit here. It seems like there's a lot more up that way. I don't know if it's where they like. I think ginseng likes cooler weather more than hot weather, you could say. But I want to thank you again for inviting me on. I want to thank everybody that stopped by. I know this is something different, but it's something that needed to be discussed. This was a great idea, and I want to thank you, Betwixt.
Once again, thank you for coming on, and I've enjoyed hearing things that are from a local area. I wouldn't know things about ginseng. I wouldn't know things about animals over there and all the rest of it. So I've really enjoyed it, and I think people who have tuned in have enjoyed it. And once again, check out Southern Nordic's channels, and I leave it there. Thanks, guys. Until soon.
See you guys.